I'm about 3 months into my pig raising experiment here in the desert. And the only reason I decided to get these pigs is because I've got grass and I have trees and I have shelter and shade for them. Water is a critical component because they need to wallow, they need to rub themselves in a mud bath when it's hot. And so that's definitely an issue here. I don't have running water at the moment. I haul in my water, but that's also an issue because the grocery store that used to sell water is no longer legally allowed to do that. And so I had a generous friend give me 500 gallons last week, and I'm about done with half of it. So I'm kind of in the cadence of about a tote of water a week of consumption, which is about 275 gallons, which is amazing, I think, because I remember watching this video on water consumption in the desert, and they were highlighting someone who was using 500 gallons a day. And after living out here and conserving water heavily, I was amazed that that was something they were touting as, not necessarily responsible. That's not the point. But conservative. Like, for them to say, "Oh, 500 gallons a day is conservative," is absolutely ridiculous to me. At my rate of consumption out here. But there's a couple things that I'm almost cheating on. Is that I don't shower here. I shower at another generous friend's place once in a while. And so, showers can certainly take a lot of water. My water consumption is pigs, watering the garden, and washing dishes. That's it. So I really don't use a lot of water right now. And when I do, I'm very conservative about it. But it was interesting when that happened in regards to the water at the grocery store being turned off indefinitely, is because that's what I've been relying on, and a lot of other people as well. So this community is there's a lot of off-grid people here. I don't know the exact number, but I would guess in Terralingua, Studi Butte, this area, maybe 80 to 90% of the population is off-grid. That's just a rough guess. I really don't know how many people live here. The census is all off. I generally know who comes into town, but there's a lot of people who don't come into town, so I really don't know how many people actually live in Terralingua. And there's also the fact that a lot of people only live here, a certain amount of time. So they live here from October to April, and they leave because it gets too hot, so they go somewhere else. And, those aren't full-timers. So I'm not sure exactly how many full-timers there are here, but a lot of those people were getting water hauled in and were purchasing water, and now they can't, at least for now. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But it was definitely a wake-up call. I've been toying around with different well projects here. So I've been digging, I've been trying to tap in that well point in certain ditches that seem to get more water than other places. I've also been digging holes near the creek to see if that would percolate some water. So it's definitely, definitely need to fast track that, especially now that I have freaking 80 plants in the ground. So I don't, a lot of people do rainwater catchment. I don't have barely any roof to do that. My shade structure is 8 by 10. No, 10 by 12. So that's 120 square feet. And I think during a 1-inch rain, that might only yield 100 or so gallons, 120 maybe. So I really need to figure out my well situation. One of the reasons why I bought this property is because it was close to the creek. I saw the trees, I saw the grass. I knew this was going to be of value to me. So I'm hoping that I can figure that out and get a constant source of water. But when you think about it, you don't just want to deplete the water table by drilling a bunch of wells and sucking up the water and using it like willy-nilly but using water doesn't need to be depleting. You can plant trees with the water and actually create more humidity in the air, which hopefully will bring more clouds in and more rain. So, consuming water is not inherently bad, in my opinion. It's when you don't understand where the water's going after you use it that's the problem. So for me, I'm growing fruit trees. I'm growing a garden. I'm trying to plant these things here and increase the water production, let's say. So the evapotranspiration that occurs, in these trees. And I think that, if you can do that kind of work in the beginning, it will improve the area in the long term. As long as you're also catching water and trying to spread it on the landscape to further enrich the water table. I think that's the biggest issue, is that the water table is relatively low compared to maybe how it was in the past because of the logging efforts that occurred a while back. And the trees are growing. There's trees growing back without our help. It's not like, I always hate when people say, "Oh, Mother Nature needs our help. Earth needs our help." No, the Earth is a system in itself, and it's a regenerating system. And I think that it will, quote unquote, heal on its own. But if we as humans in our lifetime want to experience more reliable environments, where we can practice self-reliance and we can practice that harmony with the environment, there's techniques that we can utilize to do that. And so that's where all the earthworks and all the permaculture and, all those techniques come into play, is so that we can regenerate the landscape around us a little more quickly and to our benefit. So, there's definitely things that we can be doing. I'm working on slowing down the water on my property with a few different techniques. To be honest, it's been very limited because I'm, all the way down by the creek. So a lot of the water flows here anyway. And there's already grass, there's already trees, there's already bushes. Like, there's not a lot for me to do. But I have noticed, there's a berm on the other side of the road, and that berm was catching a lot of water. I think it broke, and then all that water was going across the road and perhaps draining through the gravel and then hitting the creek, if that makes sense. So, one of my little projects has been to rebuild that berm and also slow down the water that's coming through to reduce the erosion that's happening. So I've taken like dead yucca, dead ocotillo, any kind of biomass, and thrown it in these little ravines and these little arroyos and these little drains, essentially, for the stormwater runoff. So I've taken a few precautions, but ultimately I would love to do more, so much so that the creek runs again. I know that's a very far-fetched goal, but my idea is that if I can slow enough water down here on the property, I would inherently raise the water table up from its current state. And then the water would have nowhere to go but flow down the creek perennially. Because right now, it's ephemeral. It only runs when it rains hard enough for there to be enough stormwater runoff to fill the creek. So that happens after, I think, a half inch, maybe an inch of rain. It'll do that. And it's a lot of water. It's insane how much water fills that creek up, and then a week later it'll be dry. Except for the little tanahas, the little pools in the creek that form. So, that's my long-range goal with this property, is to implement techniques that slow down the water enough to raise the water table so that the creek would then partially flow. I mean, if I only got an inch of flow, I would be stoked. I think, it was like bittersweet to see tadpoles in one of the Tanahas because I knew that it was going to dry out eventually. But to know that there's the potential for that kind of aquatic environment in the creek is awesome. And I just think it takes time and work. And I've seen videos of people doing this kind of regenerative landscape restoration, and they'll come back 30 years later and see the benefit of their work. So if I am alive till I'm 80 or 90 or 100, like my grandpa was, then I could see the results, in 30, 40 years, which would be so cool. So I think that, the water thing is definitely a priority. It's been bumped up since we had the issue with the water at the grocery store. We can still get water, but I've heard it's a lot slower of a pump rate, and you have to make a reservation. It's a whole thing. I've still yet to do that. I have about 250 gallons of water left, so should be good for another week, but we'll definitely need to figure that out. And it's good. I think it's a good motivation for me to figure out how I can get water here from the property, and also, how can I restore the water table here in my area with different techniques. So definitely going to showcase those when it happens. But until then, I will conserve my water a little bit more than I have. Even though I'm already conserving it, I'm going to take even more precautions to use gray water instead of just dumping it on random bushes. I'm going to use that gray water from my campers on the fruit trees and probably the garden as well. So there's always opportunities for better use of the gray water.